our success could be something that really ends up doing us a disservice, because we'll say, I've done all this and I'm still not happy. Right? Because you weren't able to be present and enjoy what you actually did.
What up? It's Dramos, and this is the recap, of course, as I do each and every week, breaking down some of the biggest headlines from this last week. A very special guest hopping on in just a little bit. She is an incredible spiritual advisor, a self-proclaimed Bruja. Emilia Ortiz will be joining me in just a little bit. But before that, man, I've been off for a little bit. Let's get into some of the BS from the last couple weeks. All right, so like I said, I've been off the last couple weeks from the show. So let me just start by asking, what the hell is going on in Texas? I mean, while I was off, Texas signed a bill into action that banned all abortions after 6 weeks, which is usually before most women even realize that they are pregnant or have missed their period. And this is all, of course, at the hands of Governor Greg Abbott. And while that whole thing is shocking by itself, to me, what was even more jarring was the fact that our very own Supreme Court here in this country has, at least for now, upheld this law. Now, this essentially means that Roe v. Wade and a woman's right to choose have both gone out the window. Which means that in 2021, crusty old white men are still trying to tell women what they can and cannot do with their bodies. And you know what makes this even more interesting? Well, it's people like Governor Greg Abbott who actually do believe in the whole my body, my choice thing, but they only believe in it when it's convenient to them. Specifically, recently when it has come to masks and mask mandates. You see, Greg Abbott fully supports people's right to choose when it comes to whether or not they want to spread a deadly virus or just wear a piece of fabric on their face instead. Yeah, he's okay with people making that decision, right? But when it comes to a woman making a decision on something that can affect her health and honestly her entire life, that's where he draws the line, right? And one quick side note when it comes to all of this that should be concerning for all of us, doesn't matter if you are a woman or not, is the precedent that this law and the Supreme Court have set when they support this type of bill. And also, I mean, generally speaking, what all of this could mean for the future of our country. You know, because it starts with abortion, but what's next? Like, where does this whole thing end? Voting rights? Sure, why not? Let's make it that no people of color can vote, right? Why not? Same-sex marriage? Same kind of thing. If they're getting this stuff passed, why wouldn't a conservative Supreme Court not back that as well? I mean, hell, democracy, as we know it, is in danger right now. And as if Greg Abbott's hypocrisy wasn't enough when it comes to abortion and mask mandates, listen to what this fool had to say when it came to victims of rape.
Texas will work tirelessly to make sure that we eliminate all rapists from the streets of Texas by aggressively going out and arresting them and prosecuting them and getting them off the streets.
What the... Maybe they do things a little differently in Texas, but last time I checked, rapists don't just go walking around wearing signs that say, "Hi, I'm a rapist." Like, it's obvious that this moron doesn't realize that only about 0.7% of rapes and attempted rapes actually end with a felony conviction. Yes, 0.7. That's less than 1% for my friends following along in Texas. And what's even more startling and shows that Abbott is just talking out of his school right now is the fact that 2/3 of rapes actually go unreported. And I know there's like some idiot out there saying, well, why don't the victims just start reporting their attacks? Well, dummy, we unfortunately have created a culture in this country where people, mainly women, don't feel comfortable sharing their stories because the people in charge, majority of which are men, oftentimes don't do much about it. And on top of that, here's another statistic for you. 89% of rape victims face emotional and physical consequences as a result of their attack. And as if all of that wasn't bad enough, your answer for making a law that forces these survivors to bear a daily reminder of their attack for 9 months and honestly for the rest of their lives, like your answer to that horrific event and taking this right away from them, your answer is, well, we're just gonna eliminate rape. That might be a little hard considering that 1 in 33 men in this country have experienced an attempted rape, or they themselves have completed a rape in their lifetime. Yes, 1 in 33 men in this country. I'm gonna repeat that again. 1 in 33 men in this country have experienced an attempted rape, or they themselves have completed a rape in their lifetime. Are you listening to that? Is the world listening to what I'm saying right now? You see, it's people like you, Governor Greg Abbott, and those who support you that deserve every terrible thing in this world that life could possibly throw your way. You are unfit for office and you are a disgusting human being. And to my people in Texas, while he's over there eliminating rape, I encourage you to remember all of this on November 8th, 2022. And I ask you to please, please do us all a favor and eliminate him from office. I'm gonna have to call my doctor because my blood pressure is through the roof right now after that one. But what the hell is going on, y'all? Hopefully to kind of help bring me back down to zero, we're gonna bring on my guest who has some experience in healing, which obviously the governor needs a lot of, and also I need some right now after getting all riled up. So helping me break down some of the other headlines from these last couple weeks, my guest is a spiritual healer, a self-proclaimed Bruja, Emilia Ortiz. How we feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. Except a little anxious about this weather that we got going on up here.
Oh, okay, okay. I mean, what's up particular got you feeling a little bit weird about it?
Well, because we about to have those, remnants of Hurricane Ida up here, and I'm just kind of like, I don't need no flash flooding.
Right. That's a fact. That's a fact. Well, listen, I want to get into what you do. I find it to be super interesting. I want to get your take on a few things. I mean, let's kind of start first and foremost. I mean, for anybody who's not super familiar with like the world of spiritual healing and all of that, I mean, how would you define what it is that you do?
Well, I do want to just, say that for everybody who is a, spiritual healer, the way that we practice is going to vary from person to person. Sure. For me in particular, I do a lot of energy work, whether that's Reiki or past life regression, inner child work, incorporating mediumship, via readings into all of that. So you get a nice full picture whenever we do a session.
Sure.
But, healing things on an energetic level, an emotional level, which then can translate into physical as well.
Right, right. I love that. So I want to kind of get your perspective on a couple current events that have been going on over the last couple of weeks and just kind of hear how you perceive them from your professional perspective, if that's cool with you.
That's cool.
Okay, so I mean, I know that you proudly always speak about your roots. You are Puerto Rican, you are from Brooklyn, but I mean, New York City has been changing and continues to change. And there was actually an article recently that was talking about New York overcoming San Francisco as now the most expensive rent in all of the U.S., which is something, incredibly difficult for anybody that's native to New York. But that means basically that a lot of its original residents will be forced out. That means that with them being pushed out, I should say, that a lot of the culture will also go with it. I mean, I recently moved further into Jersey and I'm missing living in an area where I'm surrounded by a lot of my Latin culture, a lot of Puerto Rican culture, and kind of seeing people that look like me. I mean, I kind of want to get your perspective why you think it's so important for us, Latinos and people of color to kind of create and maintain our close connection to our culture.
Well, gentrification has been going on for a minute in, New York City. And I think it's super important that we maintain these spaces because it's not just cultural in the sense of like being cultural for New York City, but it's also cultural for the people, right? These are things that helped us to remain connected to our cultures, having communities where you saw people who looked like you, who sounded like you, who shared a similar culture. And the other part of why it's important for it to be more affordable for the people, you know, who have, let's be real, made it what it is, you know, be able to continue to live there, is that we've built so much. And I think especially for people who are children or people of the diaspora, we made our own little kind of island in a sense out of these things, you know, and I often have joked about being Puerto Rican, but being born on the wrong island. You know what I mean? Because
I love that.
You know, and I think that's something that it's important for us to be able to maintain those communities, right? Where there is aspects of our Caribbean culture in these places in the diaspora. But when we are forced to have everybody who created those spaces move out because they cannot afford it, we lose a part of our connection to our culture, right? For so many of us who don't have, you know, the opportunity to go back to the island, right? Or whose family all left from the island, right? And moved into the diaspora. It's kind of like, well, where do we go now? You know? And where do we find that connection now? Well, we end up in spaces that do not have what we need culturally. You know what I mean? Support-wise. And I think that's really sad, you know, that this is happening. Like, it's not okay.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you realize it a little bit more as you get older, the importance of staying connected to your culture. You know, I think for me, you know, once my family kind of left the Bronx and we moved into like the suburbs, you know, I kind of felt myself, I lost a lot of that culture. And it wasn't until I got older and I'm searching for this sense of community and I'm searching for a bit more fulfillment in my life, that once I started diving into my culture and being a part of you know, different aspects of it, I really started to feel a little bit more whole as a human. You know what I mean? I think as human beings, it's safe to say that we all kind of need this sense of community kind of surrounding us, you know?
No, for sure. And I think, you know, part of what you're also touching on is accessibility changes, right? When you move to a space that doesn't have people who are part of your culture, you know, in that space, you have to then go seek it out, right? And unfortunately, not everybody is able to do so within the same capacity, right? And it's not within walking distance. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just walk to the bodega, right? You can't just walk to the botanica anymore. You can't just walk down the block and see somebody coming, you know, the piragua lady, you know, all kinds of little bits of our cultures. You know, that accessibility, it really does change.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny you say that you felt like you're born on the wrong island sometimes. And I mean, even talking about how you kind of focus on healing like the inner child, you know what I mean? I think probably a lot of people who, you know, whose families are, who, you know, people who are second generation, you know, first generation, whatever it is, and they got out of the initial area that their parents were growing up in, they probably do. I mean, that's what my whole podcast is about, feeling the sense of not belonging. You know what I mean? And I think that almost you grow up as a kid feeling lesser than at times, you know what I mean? Like you don't have anywhere to look to that you feel accepted almost.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's really unfortunate because you end up not seeing yourself in anybody around you, right? Or anything around you. And that can be so damaging for us, especially as children, teenagers, you know, as we then grow into adulthood. Fortunately now, you know, due to the internet, accessibility has shifted in a sense, right? You can find community online, but that's not the same thing as in-person connection, right? And it's so sad because we hear these stories, right, from our parents or different family members about their experiences growing up. And so many of us, you know, while we may have had bits and pieces of that, as things have changed with gentrification, there's less and less of that, right? And there's so many of us who are, you know, who are having kids or have kids right now and are saying, wow, my children aren't going to have the opportunity to experience that the way that I did. Even if I do my best to, you know, maintain it via family, they're not going to have the same experience as I did they saw these people as, you know, the owner of the bodega, right? Or, you know, people within the neighborhood who showed an example of what they could be while also still maintaining our culture. And these connections, and you kind of get lost, especially I think for people of color, there becomes this aspect of thinking only white people can do certain things, right? Or you have to be white, or as close to white as possible to be able to achieve certain things. And that's really damaging for children, especially.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're touching on a lot of really important things. And I'm big also on pointing the finger inward sometime as well, though, because I think we also can be a detriment to ourselves and not kind of realize it. I think that even kind of what we're seeing, culture when it comes to music, a lot of the music that a lot of us grew up on was homophobic. It was misogynistic. We're seeing it with like Lil Nas X, right? And a lot of the backlash that someone like him gets. He was controversial because he had like sneakers with his blood in it, but that was something that you had, rockers doing for years, doing things like that. Tony Hawk just did it in a skateboard and nobody batted an eye. But when a black gay kid does it, it's all of a sudden the most controversial thing. Even somebody like DaBaby and all the backlash that he's getting, Bad Bunny when he dressed in drag, all that kind of stuff. Let's kind of talk about what, a lot of the culture that we grew up on, the detriment that it also can have on us as kids moving into adulthood.
I think it's especially important that you touched on the homophobia. Misogyny is definitely getting, it's fair play, I feel like, of attention, right? Where people really are starting to recognize and hold people accountable, not as much as they should, but it is making a lot more progress than I feel is being made when it comes to the LGBTQ, plus community, whether it's transphobia or homophobia. There is so much projection around these things that are so damaging for children, especially, and even just us as adults, where it doesn't allow us to be who we may really be deep down inside for fear of safety, for fear of judgment, And I think it's really horrible because when we do that and we make it so that people are afraid for their physical safety, right? Not just their mental well-being, but their physical safety to do these things. And they hear it over and over and over in music. We do our community a disservice, right?
Yeah.
And we make it so that they don't feel that they have community within certain parts of their identity, right? Our cultural identity. We might end up finding community in queer spaces, but that doesn't always intersect with communities of color. And the reality is, communities of color have had, queer people, like homosexuals, transsexuals, everybody in their communities since forever.
Right.
This is not anything new, and it's really disheartening to see just how much we let slide, right? Because we're like, oh, well, I grew up hearing that and I thought that was okay, right? That doesn't mean that it's okay just because we used to hear it all the time, right? Like, that doesn't make it acceptable. And I think there's that piece of when you know better, you got to do better, right? Now, there comes a point where as adults, with the different amount of accessibility due to the internet, it is our responsibility to do better at educating ourselves. I think there comes a point where you have to stop asking the communities who have been harmed to educate you on these things. I think, there's a part of our personal journeys where we have to take that responsibility to go and educate ourselves because there is so much. You can't keep yelling at people who you've harmed. Oh, teach me, teach me, teach me. That's not fair.
Right.
They already have to do the, emotional labor of repairing, whatever damage has been done. And now you want them to teach you on top of that.
Right.
Like, that's not okay.
Right. Yeah. It's this extra burden, if I'm not mistaken. What you're saying is kind of like, we have to repair ourselves, and then we also have to educate others on how to treat us properly almost. You know what I mean? It's like this double burden that many of us kind of bear, whether it is a person in the LGBTQ plus community or somebody of color. It's like we bear this double burden of trying to get over our own trauma from being oppressed on top of trying to teach our oppressors why they shouldn't oppress us.
Basically, like, it's too much.
Right. I agree. And I also think what you were talking about with not giving people the space, a safe space to be themselves, is incredibly important. Even if you're talking about something a little less serious than what we're talking about when it comes to homophobia or racism, but even like, this idea of like, oh, that's a white thing. And I use air quotes, you know what I mean? Like when it comes to that's white music, that's a white person's way to dress, that's a white person's way to speak. It's like you're making people have this identity complex about themselves because they don't fit into this box that their own community is setting. Like their own community is creating these stereotypes that just serve us no value, you know?
No, exactly. And I think that's something that really frustrates me, right? Is, I understand there's times where, as a whole, like, collective wise, these things don't apply to our cultures in a sense, right? We're like, well, that's not what we were taught. That's what white people were taught. But there's times where, as you said, we're just limiting ourselves. You know what I mean? And we are also doing the work, right, that our oppressors want us to do for them. You know what I'm saying? And that's also where it's like, we have to do better with that. And we can't keep projecting those things onto people in our community just because they're different or do things differently than how our community as a collective seems to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, even for you, I think, not changing the way you dress, the way you speak, all of those things. I mean, I imagine that was, done obviously on purpose because you wanted to make sure that people understood that you didn't have to look or sound a certain way to do important work. I mean, kind of speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. It's interesting because so many of the times when we hear like healer or wellness, any of these kinds of things, we think of somebody who is polished a certain way.
Right.
And we feel that this is not something for us because this person does not dress like me or anybody I know. They don't sound like me or anybody I know. We can't relate. We can't connect. That's something that I experienced in my own journey of feeling that I couldn't connect with certain people because I could not see not even people in my community in those people, right? I could not find anywhere to connect with them. And it does translate over into, how they're able to give care for you, right? Because it's not just that, somebody needs to wear, tracksuits or whatever, baggy clothes or anything, or wear Jordans or whatever. You don't have to dress exactly like me. But if I cannot find somewhere to relate and connect with you at all culturally, there's going to be things that I eventually, whether it's in the first session or a totally other session, I'm going to have to teach you and educate you. And if I'm supposed to be receiving healing, or receiving, whether it's therapy, whatever it is, and I'm having to educate you, that is taking away from what I'm supposed to be receiving. Right. And it's putting me in the position of having to do, educational labor. And that's not fair to me as a client. And I think that's something that I wanted people to understand who are in this business, whether it's in healing or in the mental health field. I wanted them to see that you could still be, who you were, right? You don't have to necessarily make yourself a certain way that then makes it difficult for certain communities that you wish to serve to connect with you. You know what I mean? And I also wanted my community to understand that these spaces and these services are most definitely for us, right? It's not that it's not for us. It most definitely is. We deserve access. We deserve somebody we can connect to and relate to, where we don't feel that we have to change ourselves in order to receive care properly.
Yeah, no, that's a fact. I mean, especially when you talk about the stigma that surrounds mental health in the Latin community, I mean, you have to attribute some of it to the fact that we've never really seen anybody that looks like us providing help. You know what I mean? Like, I know for me, it was years before I had a person of color as a therapist. You know what I mean? It was like an older white woman was my first therapist. And like, while she was nice and educated on the subject, there were certain things that she just didn't understand. You know what I mean? And it definitely, I think, turned me off to therapy for a few years and just feeling like I wasn't getting the full experience that I needed, out of therapy, and kind of feeling like maybe therapy just isn't what I was hoping it would be for myself,
No, absolutely. And I myself experienced that, and there was things, like I said, I ended up having to educate this therapist on, and even at times when I did that, they still didn't get it. And I'm here like, okay, now I'm paying to waste both of our time, right? It's like, this ain't doing nothing for me, and you're not getting it, so it's really not doing anything for you either. And here I just wasted a whole session trying to explain to you certain things, whether it's about, when they tell you to address certain things with your parents, right? And you're having to explain, listen, we don't do that in this household. So you gotta help me figure out well, why not? Why can't you talk about these? Because culturally, we just can't.
Right.
And they're like, but I don't understand why.
Right.
That's not an excuse. And I'm like, oh, okay, I know that's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. You're not really helping me navigate how to get around that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point, because it's like, not only are you coming from a background where like going to therapy means that everybody's looking at you like you're crazy, but then imagine having to go to your parents and be like, yeah, so the therapist told me this about the way you guys brought me up. And like, get the fuck out of here. You know what I mean? Like,
no.
So like, it definitely is this kind of disconnect. And it's definitely like, it's comical just because of how common it is. And like, for us, it makes sense, but it's interesting that, yeah, like these cultural kind of boundaries that I think a lot of people don't realize, like they really do exist, you know, and it's important to address them.
No, absolutely. And I think that's also why so many of us get turned off from therapy. Sure. You know, I think there's a piece of, we feel it's not for us because of what our communities say, right? Everybody looks at you as though it's the worst thing in the world that you're going to do that, right? Or you even hear people say, oh, we don't do therapy because we don't talk about those things, right? Or we don't talk about those things with people we don't know. Or that don't leave this house. Or, you know, all these kinds of, there's always something that puts up a barrier, right? Culturally for us. So then when you take the steps to then go, right, and seek this out, and here you are putting yourself out there, right? And they're telling you like, oh, okay, wow, this, you got to do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, listen, you don't know the barriers that I had to jump over just to get here. Now you're trying to get me to do something that's just like, I already know it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
You know, so I feel that it's rough.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I mean, I want to address this just because it's important, but it's definitely a heavy topic. I mean, we are in the midst of Suicide Prevention Month, you know. So, I mean, obviously, you know, this should be something we speak about every month just because of the importance of making sure that we are all taking care of ourselves and you know, taking care of each other. But I mean, let's just kind of dive into this just a little bit. I mean, from the people that you've worked with and all these things, I mean, anybody that is going through some of these dark places, I mean, what are kind of some of the things that you start with to try to, you know, remind them that, man, like we need you here. You know what I mean?
You know, it's different for every person because all of our reasons, you know, and all the things that have led up to this is different for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So I really do try to treat things on an individual level when I'm approaching these things.
Sure.
But a lot of the time, you know, I do try my best to start with, well, what support system do you have at all? Because as much as it's an individual choice, right, to either commit suicide or not, support from our community that is actual genuine support can be very helpful, right? Sure. And it doesn't mean that it's going to, you know, remedy the whole situation and remove the suicidal ideations or anything like that. But it can be something that does help get you, you know, moving in a different direction and helping them to find a way to build a better support system because it can be very complicated when you feel that that's it, right? There's no point in you being here. Everything is just going to continue to be worse, right? And everything has already been so bad. You're exhausted, all kinds of, you know, there's so many things that come up when you're, you know, having suicidal ideations. But it's hard to tell somebody in that situation, you know, that, hey, if you don't stick around, you're not going to be here for when it gets better. Right. You know, that can be something that's even more harmful because it's like, okay, I know you're saying it's going to get better, but like that really is like exhausting for me to even kind of think of how am I even going to do that. Right. Sure. So that's also why I try to see what, you know, and help them to build a better support system because, you know, and I even say to them, you know, I'm very honest where I am never going to tell somebody that all these things are going to make anything stop, right? You can work out. You can have a job that, you know, you actually enjoy. Sure. You can have so many different things, right? You can have so many things that everybody tells you to do to not have these problems. And you may still have them. Sure. And the reason I'm honest with them about that is because that can be even more frustrating and disappointing if you do all these things, you know, quote unquote, right. And are then still experiencing these thoughts and feelings and desires because then you're saying, wow, I'm doing everything quote unquote, right. And I still feel this way.
Sure.
Something must be so wrong with me, right. That there's no point in me being here.
Right.
You know, and that's why it can be so difficult, right? Is because how do we approach this when somebody can have, you know, all the things checked off the list, and still be feeling this way, you know, which is why a support system is important, because these things can kind of be helpful in a way where then if there's something, you know, that's going to stop you, right, from deciding this, it's to do this, it's going to be different for each individual, right? And sometimes our support system can be a big source of that, you know, and nobody, I do tell a lot of people, like, nobody other than you should be why you still want to be here, because when it depends on somebody else, unfortunately, that can put you in a position where, let's say they do something, right, or they remove themselves from your life, or, you know, all kinds of things, that can mess you up even more, you know, which is why, again, like, seeing that if they have a support system, it's not just based in one person, you know, and you have to do your best to try to reassure them that they do have, like, a reason to be here that is bigger than their suffering. You know,
that's a great point that you bring up about not allowing it to kind of rely on some other outside person, because, I mean, we're all humans and people will inevitably disappoint you at some point in time, right? Even the most well-intentioned person will come up short at some time. And I mean, that sounds terrible to kind of put all your life literally in one person, and you know, it's definitely a recipe for disaster. So that's definitely really good, really good advice. And I think when you bring up also the idea of somebody being able to check off all the boxes and still being unhappy, that almost makes you feel like magnified worse. You know what I mean? Because it's like, listen, I will never be happy because I have a good job, I got money in the bank, I got a girlfriend, a boyfriend, whatever it is, and I'm still not happy. That's incredibly depressing. I feel like not a lot of people kind of speak about that. You know what I mean? This idea, there's almost like this trauma that comes along with success, I feel like, as well. There's a lot of kind of nuance to that I feel like that isn't spoken about enough as well.
No, for sure. And I think that's something that a lot of us don't recognize. Like, you know, it's interesting because so many people will say, like, oh, you have to heal X, Y, and Z to become successful, right? I will be very honest. That's not necessarily true. You can still achieve so many things and become successful in so many ways without having taken certain steps to heal certain things within yourself. You know, we see so many narcissistic, you know, people who have billions and billions of dollars, right? And all their endeavors are very successful. But I do remind people that when you don't take steps to heal certain things within yourself or address them within yourself, like, you know, it's not always necessarily about fully healing them, but addressing these things and being aware of them. You can end up in a position where you're not able to actually enjoy your success, right? And you know, money's not going to make you happy. You know, money is definitely going to make it so that you could pay your bills.
Make it a little easier.
Not be stressed about those things. It definitely does make it easier in that way. But it's not necessarily going to be what makes you happy. You know, it can solve a lot of your stresses. I think we need to be transparent about that. But money is not necessarily the source of someone's happiness. And so many of us will chase that, especially if you're somebody who grew up where money was scarce, right? You think that the more money you have, right, the better you're going to be. You're not going to be depressed anymore and all these things. But then you realize, like, yes, money took away the stress that money-related stress brought in. But it did not provide you with happiness, right? And it's put you in a position where you're just continuously seeking the next thing over and over and over, right? You kind of have this obsession with the next destination, right? As opposed to being able to embrace and enjoy the success that you have, right? And enjoy, oh, wow, like, I was able to do that, right? I was able to do that. And look at everything that I, you know, have accomplished. Like, wow, that's amazing, right? And being present for that. So many of us are then now jumping to the next thing. And those are things that we need to address within ourselves, you know, because otherwise our success could be something that really ends up doing us a disservice, because we'll say, I've done all this and I'm still not happy, right? Because you weren't able to be present and enjoy what you actually did.
No, that's a great point. You're touching close to home for myself personally. I'm sure a lot of people out there. I mean, so I could talk about this forever, but one last thing I want to talk about with you is something I've seen you consistently posting about on your social media, and that is basically, you know, embracing and appreciating every part of yourself. I mean, you've been, you know, kind of documenting your journey into being a new mom, and talking about how after giving birth, that your body has new curves, you know, and I want to talk about kind of, you know, the part of healing where you're and how important it is and how we can find that same appreciation for ourselves that you have found for yourself and this change in your life.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting, especially with this whole snapback culture.
Right.
It's interesting because there's so many different cultures that so many of us feed into, right? Whether it's snapback culture, success culture, all these things that can do us a disservice if we're not mindful of how we're engaging with them, right? So for me, the only thing that I really wanted to snap back, you know, just for context, was my insides. I just wanted my insides to go back to where they needed to be. I wanted my, you know, uterus to go back to the size it needed to be, a bag lady, just all those things. I wanted that to be okay. I wanted my, you know, I didn't want to have diaxis recti, which is where your ab muscles have, you know, separation, all kinds of things. I didn't want those things, right? My focus was on that stuff being better and accepting that there was a body that I had prior to having this baby, right? And now I have this new body that is not just supporting me, but it's supporting my baby, right? It's supporting my child. This is a new part of my life journey. And so with that, I need a new body, you know, in a sense. I need to have more to me, a little more, you know, I need to be a little more solid to be able to pick up my baby comfortably or have somewhere for my baby to, you know, rest on me comfortably. And I think that's something that we have to take into consideration when we're healing these things, is accepting we're going to be different in every part of our journey, right? Different ways that we show up in the world, different ways that we show up for ourselves and are presented to the world and presenting, you know, to ourselves. It's always going to shift. You know, I really do look at us as shapeshifters in that way, on an internal level and external. It's not just our physical that's going to shapeshift, but who we are internally will shapeshift over time, right? And if we can learn to focus on accepting and being present for who, you know, and how we're showing up in the moment and why and the purpose of that is something that can be so helpful. You know, and it's interesting because I have really been able to step into this with ease compared to some people. You know, and all of our journeys are different. All of how we're going to experience things are different. You know, but I was able, I really do feel that I was able to do so because I accepted that this was a new journey. And with this new journey was going to come new things, including a new physical shape, right? A new mental state, you know, all kinds of things.
A new life, essentially.
And, you know, some people, it's kind of interesting. I know everybody wants to lose their stomach. You know, this is a good example. Everybody wants to lose the stomach right after the baby, right? I have really found purpose in having a little extra tummy, a little extra chichos, because my baby is 19 pounds already at only 5 months. Okay. So I need a little extra shelf to be able to rest the baby on. You know, and even after I first had my baby, you know, I was kind of thankful that as much as my stomach went down relatively quickly through breastfeeding, there was still enough of a shelf to rest my baby on because I was still physically recovering, you know, like birth is a whole thing. Like my body was still like, oh girl, we did that. Okay. Like, all right now, you know, and I think we have to kind of apply that to different parts of our life, right? Is accepting that certain things are going to show up to do us a disservice, right? Like sometimes things are going to show up to kind of hinder our ability to do things, right? And then there's going to be parts that show up to do us a service, you know, and it's about being present for which things are which, you know, and accepting, hey, this is showing up to actually do me a service. And maybe it did not look like what I thought it was going to look like, you know, but it's actually helping me. Or, hey, this is showing up, you know, to kind of hinder me, you know, and things are going to show up in, I think, both parts, you know, equally, right? We're not going to just have all these things to show up and help us out. You know, there's going to be things that show up to kind of do us the service and hold us back and hinder us or put us in a position where we need to ask for help. You know, that's how I also try to look at those things, as, okay, this is showing up as a way to let me know that I need to ask for help in this area. Right. You know, even in life, there's times where, like, you know, my anxiety or my depression have shown up, you know, in times of success. And I've had to ask people in my support system, you know, or in my community, like, hey, I need communal care with this. And I really need some help with this. It's not always easy to ask for help. But I think it really is something that if you can kind of look at, you know, these things showing up for that purpose, that can be a lot more beneficial, as opposed to looking at it as, wow, this is a problem that just I have to solve, that's showing up to, you know, mess me up and things like that. Wow, no, this is an opportunity for me to lean into my community, right? Because humans by nature, we are communal beings, you know, and sometimes I do think that these modern ways of living push us into a position of having to lean back into what we by nature want to do, right? Which is be communal and receive support from our community. But unfortunately, we can't do that, right, instinctively all the time anymore, because we're living in this new society that goes against that. Individualism is so big, right? And so we're kind of being forced, you know, to have to do something that is in our nature, but doesn't always feel so natural.
Right, because we're trying to almost a lot of times like give off this idea of perfection, right? Because society, social media, culture, all of those things has like created this idea of just displaying your highlight reel. And, you know, what you're saying is that when we should be leaning into community and asking for help from those around us, we are held back from doing that because, you know, the way society is set up now, that shows a sense of weakness and it shows that we aren't perfect. You know what I mean? And yeah, I mean, there's so many detrimental things to that. And I love how you're saying just embrace those things. I mean, it reminds me of this book I'm reading by Joseph Campbell, and he just kind of talks about Easter. And I'm not here to anybody's religion, but he talks about religion as more of just like symbolism rather than actual factual dates. You know what I mean? But talks about Easter and the idea of like Passover and stepping into like a new life and leaving the old one behind. And that's kind of what we have to do, is leave the idea of the old life behind and in order to make space for our growth and inevitably this new life that we're all going to be taking on as we get older, you know, whether we want to or not. And the beauty is in embracing it. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Because, you know, change is going to happen whether you want it to or not. Like it's going to happen with you or without you. You know? Yes,
that's a fact. Well, Emilia, I mean, it's been incredible to get to connect with you and have a conversation. I feel super inspired by it. I enjoyed it very much. I mean, where can people check out more from you and follow you on and all that kind of stuff? Keep up what you're doing.
You can, you know, keep up with me on Instagram. My social handle for that is at ethereal.1 or ethereal.1, you know, low double entendre.
I love it. I love it. Well, listen, thanks again for hopping on. Hopefully we can do this again sometime in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Absolutely.
Man, big thank you to my guest this week, Emilia Ortiz. I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with her. She has a lot of really great insights, so make sure you go follow her on socials. And before we get out of here, man, let's end on some positivity. All right, so I found that this quote was super fitting to the conversation that I was having with Emilia, and even could be, man, put towards the first kind of way I started the show today. A lot of heaviness, so I want to bring some encouragement. Now, this quote comes to us from Tori Amos, and the quote says, "Healing takes courage, and we all have courage, even if we have to dig a little to find it." And that's absolutely true. All of us go through so many different things in our lives, some worse than others. I'm never going to compare somebody else's trauma. There are so many people going through so much in this life, and people who are continuing to go through so much trauma in their lives. And we just have to find the courage in ourselves to accept the fact that we need healing, that we have to address these issues. And man, like people like Emilia, you know, seeking professional help, somebody who could be a sounding board. Even what she talked about, you know, finding a group of people or a person that you can lean on in times. You know, what does your support system look like? You know, from therapists to quality people in your life who are always there for you. You know, all of that kind of stuff, all of these different things that equate to a support system. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that there are some things that you need to heal about yourself. That takes strength, that takes courage to be able to admit those things, you know. And you just going going out there and not healing these broken parts of you, these hurt parts of you, you know, that inner child that has been carrying around certain things into adulthood, you know, you're just not giving yourself the opportunity to live a truly beautifully blessed and fulfilled life. And I encourage everybody to go out there and get the help that you need. I think we're all in need of help in some way, shape, or form, at least in some point in our lives. You know, we all need somebody to lean on. And I encourage you to accept the fact that we're all in need of healing. And with a little bit of work, we can get to a much better place in our lives, for sure. Now, with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in. We will be back with a new episode next week. Until then, stay safe. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.